I found myself standing at the edge of what once was a mountain dam, now transformed into a raging, unstoppable flood sweeping through the recently built houses the HOA had unlawfully constructed on my property. Pause. Picture this moment. Yes, that is me. You might be curious how I ended up causing a flood that consumed an entire suburban neighborhood and why no one managed to halt me. It began when they believed they could steal what my grandfather bequeathed to me. After my grandfather's passing, I never imagined his most precious legacy would turn into a battleground. He left me his land, a vast expanse of countryside with wide fields and thick forests, dense enough to lose your way in. At its center stood a mountain dam he personally designed and built after surviving one of the worst floods the region had ever faced. This structure was more than just a dam. It was a fortress of stone and determination, a heritage of wisdom and resilience passed down through generations. The will was unequivocal, signed and witnessed. The land, the water rights, and everything rooted in the soil belonged solely to me, without dispute. For some time I enjoyed peaceful days, holding a job in town and spending weekends repairing fences, strolling along the dam's ridge, and observing the changing seasons across the mountains. The first sign of trouble arrived quietly, not with noise, but through a letter in my mailbox, pristine white with an unfamiliar gold-embossed emblem. It was from Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. It read. I furrowed my brow. I was never involved in any HOA. My property lay beyond the town boundaries, safeguarded by zoning decisions fought for by my grandfather many years ago. At least, that was what I believed. The letter I received stated very politely that I was now subject to community oversight according to new county maps approved during the last municipal session. Curiosity shifted to unease when I attended the following town meeting and saw a slick man with flawless hair presenting vivid maps depicting the expansion of the Willow Ridge community facilities. Right there in bold blue ink, my land was absorbed into their new development plan as if it had no previous owner. I stood up, furious, demanding an explanation for how this could have occurred. That was when I encountered Karen Langford, the HOA president, a self-styled community visionary and a true embodiment of nuisance. She feigned confusion, tilting her head like a curious owl, then confidently assured me that everything was entirely legal. She called it a survey mistake, a simple clerical error that had been corrected. I left that meeting with a growing sense of dread gnawing at my gut. In the following 2 weeks, surveyors trampled across my fields without even bothering to knock on my door. Wooden stakes adorned with neon flags appeared like unwelcome weeds across the land, each marking the destruction of my heritage. Next came the heavy equipment. Bulldozers and excavators arrived, cutting roads through the pastures where my grandfather had once taught me to ride horses. Foundations were laid hastily and carelessly. Before I could even catch my breath, the Homeowners Association had already approved 58 luxury craftsman-style houses, the banners proudly claimed, right on top of my property. I fought back with everything I had. I hired a local attorney, a good man, honest and sharp, yet even he seemed uneasy when he saw the names listed on the documents. County clerks dodged my questions, and property officials misplaced my complaints. Karen smiled sweetly at me whenever I objected, her team of board members nodding behind her like obedient dogs. They made me appear to be the irrational one, the stubborn holdout clutching onto old deeds and obsolete maps. At the second town meeting, Karen, with a fake sympathetic tone, suggested that I accept one of their generous offers to buy me out before, as she said, progress left me behind. I remember how the room fell silent when I stood up and loudly declared, so every last realtor and bureaucrat could hear, that I would never sell what my family had built, no matter the price. That was the moment when it changed from bureaucratic theft to outright hostility. Violation notices began to appear on my old truck, fines for fabricated code violations piled up like unpaid bills. One morning I woke up to find a sign staked in my yard declaring the area a future development zone and warning of no trespassing. My own yard. When I called the sheriff's deputies, they just shrugged and said it was a civil matter. Every door I knocked on slammed shut faster than the one before. Karen was not merely playing tough. She was playing with rigged dice. I learned from a helpful clerk at the county recorder's office that the Willow Ridge HOA had been generously contributing to certain council members' campaigns. This led to inspection waivers and zoning exceptions being granted. Everything was disguised with cheerful photos and handshake agreements. I was outmatched, outsmarted, and outvoted. For every formal complaint I submitted, I faced a counter-threat from the HOA's attorneys, accusing me of harassment for challenging the new boundaries. I realized I could not confront them directly, at least not yet. So I did what any patient person would do when faced with overwhelming odds. I acted as if I was giving up. I stopped attending town meetings. I allowed the flags to remain in my fields. I acknowledged Karen politely when she waved from her shiny new white Range Rover, flashing her unnervingly fake smile. While they celebrated, breaking ground and selling plots as if they were triumphant conquerors, I meticulously documented every action they took. I photographed every construction violation, every neglected environmental consequence, every uprooted tree and broken fence post. I recorded all conversations, saved every letter, and copied every dubious zoning approval I could uncover late at night from public archives. I quietly assembled my case, a fortress of evidence stacked in boxes in my grandfather's old workshop beneath the dam. I made no noise. I did not complain. I did not lift a finger to stop them. I watched as they poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into infrastructure they barely understood. They laid water pipes across unstable ground and constructed oversized mansions right on top of old floodplains without even a basic geological study. They believed I was defeated. They assumed the land would conform to their plans. They failed to see that some things, especially ancient rural land and the heritage that protects it, do not break just because you paint over them with ink and concrete. They assumed ownership of the land simply because they had signed a contract. But paper is meaningless when the rain begins to fall and the mountains start to roar. They had stolen my fields, my forests, my land. They declared war without comprehending the battlefield. Deep inside, I knew a reckoning was unavoidable. As certain as gravity and twice as merciless, I could only wait for the first storm. The dam had always been the quiet guardian of the valley, a solid barrier of stone and compacted earth, created with nothing but determined hands, hard work, and the haunting memory of a past tragedy etched into the town's history. 80 years ago, before the land was divided and sold, before asphalt cut the mountains into orderly blocks, a flood had struck, a catastrophic event. Not just any flood, but one so devastating it did not merely wash away houses, but erased entire families from existence. My grandfather was a young man at the time, carrying sandbags to hold back the water. Together with neighbors, they struggled in vain to hold back a flood of mud and water that ignored deeds, fences, and hopes alike. They did not succeed. The valley was submerged, and when the waters finally withdrew, they left behind only wrecked homes, devastated fields, and gravestones where abundant life once thrived. Grandfather vowed such a tragedy would never happen again. Although not formally trained as an engineer, his determination often proved stronger than skill. Over the course of years, not months nor a brief summer effort, he and the other survivors constructed a dam into the mountainside, placing stone after stone. This was no modern concrete structure. It was traditional engineering, a huge support made of earth, rock, timber, and trust, created to tame the mountain's fury. When storms arrived, it did its job brilliantly. For decades, while nearby counties endured landslides and seasonal floods, their valley remained safe and dry. Grandfather's dam absorbed the mountain's outbursts, guiding rainwater gently down the slopes into the small rivers below. As time passed, the original danger the dam protected against slipped from people's minds. The reason for the old dam was forgotten, but the land never forgot. Water always recalls its course. When the Homeowners Association arrived, full of shiny plans and neat blueprints, they paid no attention to the dam. To them, it was simply an unsightly lump on the landscape without significance. They aimed to level the ground for easier construction. Drainage channels were covered, creeks were redirected, and vast sections of the old floodplain were bulldozed to create space for cul-de-sacs and decorative fountains. The worst offense happened the day I observed from afar, hidden behind a row of ancient trees, as a backhoe operator wearing a bright safety vest and completely oblivious dug into the outer edge of the dam itself. Not deeply enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to compromise its stability, enough to create wounds that would worsen with the first heavy rainfalls. I wanted to shout out loud. I wanted to rush down the hill and put myself between them and the legacy of my grandfather's work. But I didn't. I clenched my fists so tightly, my nails cut into my palms, and I remained out of sight. Because by that point I realized something crucial. They did not simply disrespect the land, they didn't even comprehend it. In their minds, they had won. They held the legal documents, arrogant signatures, and politicians firmly in their grasp. To them, I was just a remnant of the old world, hanging on to memories that no one valued. They had no clue they were constructing their shiny suburb atop a ticking time bomb of their own creation. They were unaware that every displaced stone, every cut waterway, every blocked overflow path was silently and patiently counting down to the moment when the mountains would reclaim what was theirs. They believed they had defeated me. They had no idea they were living on borrowed time. Borrowing time was all I had left. So I prepared in the only way possible. I stopped openly visiting the dam. I ceased repairing small leaks after storms. I no longer cleared the intake channels that prevented pressure from mounting behind the dam wall. I allowed debris to build up, letting silt settle. The natural forces quietly gathered just beneath the surface. I became invisible to them, a forgotten shadow wandering the woods while they hosted barbecues on half-finished concrete patios and installed solar lights along streets destined to disappear in half a year. When the autumn rains arrived early that year, I observed them from my porch, sipping coffee as puddles formed on the freshly cut lawns. When winter transformed into a wet, chaotic spring, I took slow, peaceful strolls beside the dam and noticed the cracks growing wider with each cold snap. I saw how the ground sank slightly where the backhoe had torn into the outer embankment. I did not cause the dam to collapse. That would have been a crime. I only stopped safeguarding it. I let nature follow its path. I let the rules of physics and hydrology, laws far older and harsher than any homeowner association's regulations, take effect as they always would once the arrogant little town of Willow Ridge decided it knew better than the mountain. The bitter truth was all their careful and costly construction work only hastened what was unavoidable. Their storm drains clogged with debris, their perfectly trimmed lawns, the topsoil washed away into clogged retention ponds. They altered the natural waterways without realizing that the mountain paid no mind to property boundaries or homeowners' clubs. It only obeyed gravity, water pressure, and the undeniable fact that water will always find its path downward. The first few intense storms served as warnings, a trial. Small sinkholes appeared in the unfinished parts of the development. The Homeowners Association blamed unusual weather patterns and ordered more fill dirt, quick but temporary solutions. They held meetings to discuss environmental stabilization efforts and imposed special charges on new residents to cover the expenses. All this while ignoring the growing tension beneath their feet. I observed everything with quiet, almost respectful patience. I kept to myself, tending to the few patches of land they had not yet bulldozed. When I ran into Karen at the gas station, I politely listened to her smug updates about the success of the Willow Ridge expansion. I smiled, nodded, and said nothing about the widening cracks spreading through the bedrock beneath her. It was no longer about revenge. It was about balance, respecting the land, my grandfather's legacy, and the ancient truth that arrogance always comes with a cost. They had disturbed a sleeping giant, but I did not need to take any action to wake it. All I had to do was step aside and let nature take its course. The remaining land lay injured and drained, forced to rest and endure. The rainy season was approaching, and this year promised no mercy. The first storm arrived like a slow, steady drum, relentless and deep, hammering the mountains until the rocks seemed to vibrate with unease. I sat on the sheltered porch of my grandfather's worn house, clutching a battered thermos of coffee, watching the gray sheet of rain crawl across the valley as if alive. The mountains disappeared behind a misty veil, and far away the distant rumble of thunder echoed low and haunting. Down in the subdivision below, in the glossy, self-satisfied core of Willow Ridge, porch lights blinked on automatically, casting small golden squares against the darkening sky. I knew this land far better than any newcomer. I understood how the clay soil would swell under the rain, how the thin top layer they had carelessly placed would slide and crack as the ancient watercourses reopened. Deep within me, I sensed that the wounded and ignored land would not protect them this time. As the rain continued relentlessly for hours, I slipped on my old boots and moved around the edges of what had once been my fields. Now it was a patchwork of incomplete homes and freshly laid streets. Even through the downpour, I saw the damage beginning. Long, jagged cracks spreading through the brand-new sidewalks, fine spiderweb fractures appearing along the foundations of houses that were yet to be lived in. Water accumulated where no drainage systems existed, forming shallow ponds and dead-end pools, gradually seeping into the basements of the priciest properties. I walked past Karen's home, an imposing structure with white pillars and imitation brick, standing dominantly atop the ridge. She was visible through the enormous picture window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. I could almost catch her voice behind the glass, blaming the weather, blaming misfortune, blaming everyone except herself. Throughout the neighborhood, construction workers in neon vests rushed to stack sandbags and dig emergency trenches with backhoes, but their efforts only worsened the flooding. They shifted soil in one place, redirected water in another, struggling to outpace the rising floodwaters with plastic barricades and urgent hopes. It was disturbingly beautiful in a tragic way, like witnessing a sandcastle dissolve as the tide comes in. And this was merely the first storm. The second arrived 3 days later, colder and fiercer, roaring down from the mountains with an intensity that felt deeply personal. I sensed the change in pressure before the storm clouds appeared, a weight in the atmosphere causing my skin to tingle. The dam, already weakened and cracked, groaned under the burden of a week's worth of rainwater. Small leaks along its edge expanded into muddy streaks. A tiny gap, no larger than a clenched fist, spewed muddy water down the slope, followed by another, and then another. I did not require any instruments or advanced tools to realize the danger. I watched the monitors, sensing what was about to unfold. My grandfather's instincts were screaming inside me. Standing on the highest ridge, the wind slammed rain against my face as I witnessed the dam take its final strained breath. The earth shook beneath my feet with a deep, gut-wrenching rumble, followed by a roar that reverberated through the valley. The dam did not collapse all at once or in a dramatic explosion. Instead, it fell apart slowly and mercilessly. Tons of trapped, angry water ripped through the breach, rushing down the mountainside with relentless fury. The force shattered trees like fragile twigs. The water chose the easiest route, the one it had followed long before humans tried to control it, and that route led straight to Willow Ridge. In mere seconds, the first row of houses, still decorated with festive banners and patriotic ribbons, was engulfed by a churning wall of muddy water. Roofs were lifted as if they were leaves, walls crumpled like soggy cardboard. Streets buckled and cracked, swallowing minivans and ornate mailboxes alike. Power lines snapped, sparking and hissing wildly above the flood. Karen's house, a shining monument to arrogance, held out just a moment longer than the rest. I saw her standing on the front porch, shouting into her phone, frozen in disbelief. The water reached her foundation and paused, as if savoring the instant, then surged forward. The soil beneath her immaculate lawn turned to liquid. The house, it trembled, swayed unsteadily to one side, and with a dreadful groan snapped cleanly in two. One section slipped down into the swirling floodwaters. The other fell back slowly, almost elegantly, like a bow. The enormous white pillars broke apart as easily as fragile sticks. It all happened within minutes. The emergency teams arrived afterward, too late, as always. They stood in water, reaching their knees, radios crackling, faces empty with disbelief. They called out orders, hung caution tape that drooped uselessly in the rain, and attempted to manage the disaster. But the mountain paid no heed to their procedures. Water never obeys alarms. From a distance, dry and composed, I watched with a slow and steady pulse. Part of me wanted to feel remorse, yet a louder part of me experienced only grim satisfaction. I had tried to warn them. Months before the bulldozers arrived, before Karen's Range Rover destroyed my grandfather's fields, I had submitted official warnings to the county about the dam's weakened state and the dangers to the land. I possessed letters, emails, and certified receipts, all carefully stored, time-stamped, and notarized. I was protected by law. I had made an effort. I had spoken up, but they, blinded by arrogance, disregarded every warning. Once the skies cleared, insurance agents appeared like vultures. They inspected the muddy wreckage with grim faces, probing collapsed driveways and half-covered foundation slabs with metal rods. The claims were rejected. "Acts of God," the adjusters said with a shrug. "Negligence," the lawyers muttered quietly. Karen attempted to take legal action against the county, the developers, the construction firms, even me. Nothing held up in court. Their own inspections, their own approvals, their own greed had brought about their downfall. The HOA, once so confident and influential, found itself overwhelmed by lawsuits from angry homeowners, bankrupt builders, and even state officials investigating illegal land use violations. Karen's name became a joke in town, a warning shared over drinks and backyard chats. Within half a year, Willow Ridge was condemned, a deserted place, half swallowed by mud and silence, a damp reminder of arrogance and forgetting a basic truth. The earth always prevails. As for me, I kept silent. I remained patient. I watched the weeds take over the ruined roads, watched the birds come back to the broken roofs, watched the creek beds carve fresh trails where sidewalks once stood. Nature accomplished what I could not. Justice swept down the mountain like a flood, and somehow, miraculously, my grandfather's land, wounded but not destroyed, was granted a fresh start. The flood had just finished cutting its rough path through the remains of Willow Ridge. When the first news crews showed up, they swarmed like flies, satellite dishes sprouting on their vans, microphones gripped tightly in eager hands. I watched from the ridgeline as they struggled through the mud. The mud, capturing images of half-submerged furniture, broken white picket fences, and shattered hopes entangled in the wreckage. Within hours, the news spread rapidly. Disaster in Willow Ridge. 58 upscale homes destroyed due to carelessness. Those words blazed across every screen and filled every newspaper. Reporters held their umbrellas against the light rain, solemnly describing the destruction to audiences statewide, while Karen, her once perfect hair and makeup gone, eyes wild and hollow, desperately tried to control the story. She claimed, "It was the weather, an unexpected act of nature. It was everyone's fault except mine." Yet the cameras ignored her justifications. The public craved a villain. Karen, stranded in her Range Rover, stuck waist-deep in a sinkhole, her million-dollar home, snapped in two like an old twig, became the ideal symbol of failure. The story gained momentum when investigators began probing deeper, asking real questions. It emerged that demolishing a dam, building on unstable soil, and rushing zoning changes through covert agreements left evidence more significant than the floodwaters. Within a week of the flood, the county declared an independent review. By month's end, the state attorney general initiated a full investigation into Willow Ridge's development methods. Public records were subpoenaed. Connections between the HOA board and local authorities were exposed, writhing under scrutiny. Every part of Karen's meticulously built domain fell apart. Kickbacks, bribery, unlawful easement submissions, fake environmental reports, all surfaced in relentless, undeniable waves. One shocking finding followed another. Homeowners, many already outraged by their failed investments, filed class action suits against Karen, the board, the developers, and even the banks that had backed the catastrophe. Names once feared in town hall meetings were now boldly printed alongside terms like embezzlement, misconduct, and gross negligence. I observed everything unfold with quiet satisfaction, never stepping into the limelight. There was no need. I had set the trap well before the first foundation was laid. Karen and her associates unknowingly walked into it, blinded by arrogance. The best part was that all their insurance claims were rejected, every single one. The adjusters, armed with solid proof of ignored alerts and reckless building practices, refused to pay a cent. Lawsuits drained the last of the board members' wealth. Karen's favorite Range Rover was repossessed first, then her jewelry, followed by her house, at least what remained after the floods and looters had devastated it. I heard she moved in with a cousin several counties away, barely getting by on temporary jobs while nursing a grudge so intense it could sour milk. The other board members scattered like frightened rats, declaring bankruptcy, shuffling through piles of documents, and dodging subpoenas. Their reputations were utterly destroyed and beyond repair. Meanwhile, I proceeded quietly and deliberately while the state argued endlessly about who was responsible and how to divide the damage. I filed my own paperwork, submitting a petition for adverse possession. Because they abandoned their claims, the law was on my side. The flooded plots, the decaying roads, the marshy remnants of Willow Ridge, all of it gradually returned to me, piece by piece, acre by acre. No one challenged it. No one even appeared to dispute the claim. They were too financially ruined, too embarrassed, or too occupied escaping their own failures. Within a single year, the land was officially mine again, legally and rightfully. I then began rebuilding what truly mattered. The first priority was the dam. I spent almost an entire summer carrying stones, patching breaches and pouring new concrete foundations with the help of several trusted old-timers who still remembered the land before greed and ambition corrupted it. We worked without fanfare or attention, under the relentless sun that had baked my grandfather's neck many decades ago. The new dam was not grand or showy, but it was tough, strong enough to resist a dozen floods, strong enough to signal to anyone watching that some things transcend politics, profit, and the petty schemes of small-minded people who believe they can outwit nature. As the dam took shape, I shifted my focus to restoring the fields. The neat sidewalks and artificial street lamps had vanished. I allowed the untamed grasses to reclaim the abandoned lots. I let the streams find their original courses once more. I welcomed the return of deer, foxes, and herons to a place finally treated with the care it deserved. The finishing touch came on a chilly autumn morning. I carried an aged cedar post along the fresh gravel road branching off from the county highway, embedded it firmly into the ground, and attached a sturdy wooden sign expertly carved by a nearby artisan. It simply stated, "Welcome to Highwater Acres. We honor the land here." Beneath that, in smaller script, was the motto I had chosen to live by: created by nature, safeguarded by memory. I stepped back, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and smiled. This was more than just a sign. It was a declaration, a caution, a vow. No homeowners association would ever set foot here again. No conniving developer would ever attempt to cover up the mountain's scars for a quick profit. This land was purchased with hard work, sacrifice, and grief. It belonged to those who remembered, not to those who forgot. On the first sunrise after placing the sign, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, grabbed my worn thermos, and hiked up to the dam. I sat atop the repaired crest, the stones still moist with morning dew, and watched the valley spread out before me. The sun burned away the last traces of fog, unveiling fields brushed with autumnal gold and streams shining like silver threads across the landscape. The marks of Willow Ridge were still visible if you looked carefully. An uneven row of half-buried fence posts, a warped manhole cover jutting out from the grass, but eventually even those would disappear. Nature had patience and would take back everything in time. I took a sip of my coffee and let the calm wash over me. My thoughts drifted to my grandfather, whose worn hands molded stone and earth with unyielding hope. I remembered the flood that had stolen so much from him, and the flood that had, in its own harsh way, returned everything to me. Then I thought about Karen, wherever she might be now, clutching bitterness like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. She had built her empire on stolen ground and deception. I had built mine on patience and honesty. In the end, only one of us held something truly worth keeping. The mountain rumbled softly beneath me, not with fury, but with contentment. It was a sound older than fences, older than court battles, older than greed, a sound that promised, in its slow, deep manner, that as long as someone paid attention, the land would survive. I lifted my thermos in a quiet toast to the past, to the earth, and to what was to come, smiling as the sun climbed higher over Highwater Acres, flooding the valley with light.